State Department head Pompeo being grilled this week in committee by Senator Menendez.
That's silliness. This president runs this government. His statements are, in fact, U.S. policy.
So now we understand that when the president speaks, it is the policy of
Senator,
the United
Senator, you've
States.
seen these policies.
So
200-plus sanctions. You've seen them, Senator.
I'm not asking you a question, Mr.
Senator,
Secretary.
I understand.
I'm summarizing
I've now been here 3 hours, and you've got a political soliloquy.
No, you know what? I've listened to your political soliloquy as a Secretary of State sitting at that table, demeaning some members here because you said that Senator Shaheen believes more in the Russian Defense Ministry. She was quoting them only because we don't know what our own government is saying. So please don't talk to me about politics. Want to talk about politics? If President Obama did what President Trump did in Helsinki, I'd be peeling you off the Capitol ceiling. Please. So here's the point. When the president speaks, it is the policy of the United States. And so when he says, in one respect, I applaud this declaration about Crimea, but then he goes and says that Russia should join the G7. Well, the reason Russia's not in the G7 is because they invaded Ukraine. So which is the policy? Because when the president speaks, it is the policy. And I must say, sir, when you speak around the world, people believe that what you say is a reflection of the policy of the United States. So I want to close by saying one thing I heard here today that I can agree with you is that we need more sanctions, and I look forward to working with the chairman, Senator Graham, and others who are interested in this regard. Hopefully we can come together in common cause to push back on Russia on sanctions that we can pursue. And secondly, I want to reiterate, I believe that it is rightful for the members of this committee, even if it's in a classified setting, to speak to the translator and or to see her notes, because that's the only way we will know what truly transpired.
Would you like to give any response?
Not a word.
You're listening to TMI for the week of July 30th, 2018. So, how's your week? Sounds like a trying week down in Toronto for you guys.
You're talking about Doug Ford.
Are you referring to? There's so many things.
Yeah, Doug Ford.
There's so many different things that you could be referring to. Could you be more specific?
Doug Ford.
Yeah, I know that, but more specific to Ford, like what? What particularly?
Well, in Toronto, municipal redistricting. Gerrymandering.
Yeah. From 47 to 25 he wants to do. Which is interesting, that's for sure. I feel bad for the candidates who have already put down their money and printed up their literature or created their websites or what have you. I'd be looking to the province to be getting my money back, because that's kind of messed up.
Is it revenge against Toronto Council?
I don't know. I mean, hell. I mean, you could hypothesize till the cows come home. I don't know. I mean, unless you're a fly on the wall at the meetings where he came up with this idea. I mean, I picked up the Friday Star, and that paper goes out, I think, around 11 o'clock out of Toronto. So it was already printed up on the front page. So it's right here. Ford takes aim at City Hall, Star exclusive, Friday, July 27th. So I don't know, is this the Ontario Toronto Star? Anyways, it doesn't matter. And then on the bottom right below the fold, Ontario to put pot sales in the hands of private retailers. So,
didn't Shoppers Drug Mart and the LCBO consider distributing pot?
Well, I think it's I think it's still going to be the LCBO that does from what I've read now from yesterday and today, it sounds like what they're going to do is you could buy it online still, and that will be the LCBO. But with respect to individual retailers, you have to buy a license. You have to get a license, basically, like with bars and stuff like that. And there's already, it says here, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Newfoundland currently plan to allow private sector participation in the cannabis sales, are well along in their regulatory and licensing procedures that will see stores open on legalization day. So, there's a number of provinces that are already going ahead with it. So because they're kind of saying, well, geez, it might be 2019 before anybody opens because they don't have enough time to get all the regulatory work in line. But if BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Newfoundland are doing it, they can just take what they've written and just apply it for Ontario. That would be my argument. So
it was supposed to be legal on July 1st.
Yeah, well,
and that was announced months and months and months in advance.
But I mean, there was bitching from all sectors, and so they thought, okay, well, from the sounds of what I've heard,
well, it was because they needed more time to get their legal act together. But now you're telling me that October 17th isn't enough time to get their act together, and I'm like, who is smoking the pot here?
A lot more people than Stats Canada realizes.
I thought the inference of my joke was that it's the lawmakers. Like, they just can't get out of bed in the morning and write simple legislation. Months and months wasn't enough for the first deadline. And then the second deadline, now October 17th. And it's like, who's been crippled by laziness and inefficiency? The weed
I think it started
smokers?
with the provincial Liberals, because you guys would have only had on Wednesday, October 17th, you guys would have only had one bloody store in a city of 2.8 million. Now the Liberals have been reduced to non-party status. They're a rump. And so the fact that Doug Ford has come in and said, okay, hey, I'm going to turn this all upside down. It doesn't make any sense. Let's hand out licenses, and let's let the private sector, we don't need the nanny state, and they'll make more money by doing that.
So it was something like 40 LCBO stores in Ontario.
Yeah, 40 stores. Yeah, that's funny.
So according to that, and if that's accurate and what you said, you're suggesting Toronto. I knew there was going to be one at, I think it was Gerrard and Victoria Park, to serve. I didn't really realize
the entire
that was
city.
Yeah,
just one. So
well, maybe they were just leaving the door open, that if that kind of what is it? Manufacturer's consent. So if the government does open one store and it's clearly not enough, then that does open the door for private competition.
Cannabis culture, companies like that to finally, be able to participate in the market here in Ontario.
This is a simple thing. You're writing a license that prevents the cops from busting you if you adhere to certain rules. It can't be that complicated.
No.
Especially when they have a complicated infrastructure already to jail millions and millions of people. And I noticed they were laying off the pot dogs. I think some people are upset that the RCMP weed sniffing dogs are all being laid off.
They've all been laid off?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay.
You'd think they could be rehabilitated to sniff for something else. But having only one LCBO that would sell weed to the population of 5 million in the GTA. On the surface, it sounds insane, but it's a bit prohibitive, which is the style of Ontario. We've had
Nanny State.
Yeah, but we've had strong alcohol laws all along after Prohibition.
Well, we are of a certain vintage when I recall, you probably recall this with your relatives or your family, going into the LCBO as children and our parents looking at a board, almost like a paint board with a list of products, and then going over to these grumpy old men, union guys, that had cigarettes and yellow-stained, fingers, and they, begrudgingly took the paper and went to the back, and thumped down on the counter.
Yeah, well,
the linoleum counter, the scotch or the vodka.
Yeah. So two things: there were no photos on the walls of any advertisement, or no yellow-colored fluids with little bubbles in them. No. You had to be, in a sense, literate enough and sober enough to read what you wanted, find some code number, select the right volume, and take that ticket, be sober enough to walk over to the counter with the ticket and litigate the contents of the ticket. And that's a kind of compromise between prohibition and you want to call it a nanny state, which is a negative connotation, but
that's precisely why I say it.
Well, let me say this to you. Even heroin, if you stop doing it, you're going to have withdrawal, but you're not going to die. But it is well known that if you take an alcoholic and you cut off their alcohol, they will die.
I saw somebody turn blue as a Smurf and drop right in front of me. And the reason was, I found out afterwards, was because he had stopped. He was a severe alcoholic and he had stopped.
So you and your nanny state criticism, okay, fine.
But everybody's responsible for taking what, ingesting what they take.
Okay. So then why do we have seat belts that we have to do up, or mandatory headlights?
Well, it only makes sense to have safety precautions.
Limits.
You have a velocity, you're going 100
these are
kilometers an hour,
safety
200
precautions.
kilometers an hour.
These
Look
are
at the boys that were killed on the bus out in Saskatchewan earlier on this year. I mean, if they'd been wearing obviously, the bus was so devastated.
There's a rule
I'm sure,
that if it's a commercial vehicle and it seats more or less than some number, seatbelts are either not or are required.
Yeah, well, look at us when we were going to school. Well, maybe not you because you're in Toronto, but for somebody like myself that lived outside of the urban center, we had school buses. And, you go over those bumps and everybody was, it was the exciting part of the trip was going over the bumps in the road because you go flying. There were no seatbelts. And there still aren't any seatbelts, to the best of my knowledge. And the same thing with motor coaches. We just had an accident earlier on this summer, just south of here, on the 401, 416, when a bus from New York State hit one of the rock outcrops, and a bunch of tourists were killed. And they were saying that probably had something to do with the fact that there weren't any seatbelts on the bus. So I'm just saying, it's always been cost.
Seatbelts in taxi cabs.
Well, there are seatbelts in taxi cabs.
So you're not required to do them up.
Well, that's your own stupidity if you don't.
Well, all right, he's a chauffeur. It's a professional service.
It doesn't matter, man. You can't beat the laws of physics. If that's, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't wear a seatbelt, if there's an option to wear a seatbelt, it's Darwin's rule. The strong survive, the weak shall perish. We're already overpopulated as it is, as a species. So.
All right, so the nanny state remains in some debate. Okay.
It's like if you don't wear a helmet and you're riding your bike. It's like velocity, man. You can't beat physics. You're going a certain speed, you get cut off, and you go over the handlebars and you hit the ground at a certain speed. Ooh. Physics will dictate, and you're the math, person here. So, anyway, I'm just saying, we all play a role in what happens to us. If we choose to continue smoking, we shouldn't be surprised if we get mouth cancer or cancer. If we choose to overeat and we get fat, then we can't blame it on fast food or chips or pop or the sugar. It's everybody, the nanny state has bred this whiny Western, really grotesque bunch of little people, that, too much fat, the chips, too much fat, and the sugar and the pop, I'm fat, meanwhile, our health system here in Canada and other nationally run health systems are just buckling because of all these people that are causing, that just have no self-control. Ugh, yeah, no, anyways. That's just my humble opinion.
You're reading the National Post too much.
No, I've always felt that. I'm probably a socialist because I believe in universal health care and education and all that stuff. But I do believe that there has to be some personal responsibility. Well, there always has to be personal responsibility. I think that's why this whole thing that happened last week in Toronto, and was listening to it on the radio. And
you're talking about Taste of the Danforth shootings.
Yeah.
Which happened before the Taste of the Danforth.
Yeah.
I
love
but
the
close
Danforth.
enough to the Taste of the Danforth that you wonder there can't be a coincidence. And then what about how it came out in the news? There was this long blackout of the names of the perpetrator and the victims. And then there was hour or two where it was suggested by rumor that the reason they weren't publicizing the names was because of a possible ISIS or Islamic State connection. And then, which if you think about it, during these other terrorist acts that happened, I'm thinking of a couple in Germany, not long after 2001. And there is this habit of having a news blackout while they do preliminary investigation. They don't want to tip off other potential perpetrators.
It's prudent. It's prudent. The public has a right to know, obviously, but at the same time, you'll get the information when all the I's, all the I's have been dotted, the T's have been crossed, and
I lost track of that story. But so what in the end was concluded? Is that guy?
No, he's not ISIS. No, he shot himself in the head, and as they were saying, people who are familiar with these organizations, jihadists would just abhor, just the idea of suicide is not something that they would do. So unless you're, walking into a marketplace like a coward and detonating yourself, but in something like this, apparently they were saying no. So he shot himself in the head, and he got the gun from his brother before his brother ended up in a coma. His brother apparently has been in hospital in a coma for over a year because of a drug overdose, and will never recover apparently. And his brother was part of a gang, and so he got the gun from his brother's room. And so when the police went to investigate where this guy lived, they also found another gun there as well. Apparently his sister died a couple of years ago from some horrendous disease, and he was living there with his mom and dad. And he'd been mentally ill his entire life with depression and psychosis. So, I guess when you hear the voices telling you to do something. I think they've been focusing personally too much on the stupid gun thing, because I recall when I was back at City TV, the Just Desserts shooting, and a young lady was shot at Just Desserts on Davenport. And I remember speaking with the owner, I think it was the owner, down on, I don't know if there's a Just Desserts on John Street anymore, but they had one on John Street. And that was a gang thing or some sort of argument. And they were talking about guns back in 92, 93. So I think it's a moot point about these bloody weapons. And I think, I think you and I were discussing this earlier. They need to treat mental illness like cancer. They need to focus on it like cancer. They need to dedicate more money to community resources for people who live in the community that have mental illness, like psychosis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and not warehousing these people in jail, in solitary confinement, and being abused by the correctional system and the people that are in there. So, it's sad for everybody. because this didn't need to happen, and this is a reflection yet again on bad governance, whether it be the progressive conservatives, or the liberals, or the NDP. People have been saying for a long time that we need to have more community resources and less cutbacks. And, it doesn't matter who's in power, what ideology is swinging from the bridge. They've all failed. And they've all failed Canada, as far as I'm concerned. These politicians.
This happened in the early 70s, right? And it's not just Canada; it's the United States. There was a change in policy.
I don't give a fuck about the United States right now. I give a fuck about Canada. We have universal health care, and we have a social safety net. Okay, like I said before, I'm a walking contradiction because I don't believe in in the nanny state, but I do believe in a strong, robust educational system and healthcare system, and we have been falling short.
Right,
that's my point.
It started in the 70s, and it seems to be a universal thing. It wasn't just in Canada; it's also in the United States. They stopped housing a lot of people who were inmates became sort of outmates, and then that support has trickled.
Yeah. Again, I really don't want to focus on the states because their approach to healthcare is like prisons, for-profit prisons and all that stuff, and I just I find that country abhorrent when it comes to that stuff. So. Canada, England has a national healthcare system, but if you look at Scandinavia and the way they've gone about things, you have a mixture of private and public, and they seem to have gotten that balance right. And it includes mental health, it includes dental health, it includes overall health. So there are systems out there that are far more robust than what we have here, and again, dropping the ball leads to these things that happened, last week. And
so, how do you think they do it in the U.S.? Do you think that because because you've mixed up a couple issues here, you have lumped in mental health care with health care, which
exactly. No, and that's intentional. No, that's intentional. The brain is part of the body, dude.
Which is a point worth bringing up. Okay, so here's an example. I think right now there's a controversy in Quebec because dentists are going to be leaving the Quebec healthcare system. And I'm like, you mean they've been getting dental care?
Mm-hmm.
Did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Find us on Twitter @ThatArcher, our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Rate the show on iTunes. It changes the way the show is listed.
Comparing how things were handled in school for, let's say, grade 6, 7, 8, and the bullying issue. And when you compare how it was in the 70s, mid-70s,
you go home, shut the door, and it's over. Today, it follows you home, and it's under your covers at 12 midnight with the light of the screens shining back in your face. Right.
But in school, there were no instructions for teachers on how to identify bullying.
You suck it up. That's what they told you to do. You suck it up.
The principal would not have been what's the word I'm looking for?
Nobody was
sympathetic.
Nobody was sympathetic back then.
Even the principal of the school would blame the victim.
Yeah.
For provoking it. It reminds me a lot of rape because back then the idea was that it was promiscuity that brought on rape, and I think bullying in the mid-70s in a school, even when you escalated it to higher levels of school board authority, it was really very much similar to how rape was treated. And so anyway, so now when I read stories that are so sympathetic to bullied kids, I'm not talking about cyber. I'm just talking about it on the school grounds even. It kind of makes me feel like, one of those old men who are like, oh, well, we used to have to walk through blizzards and 4-foot snow and to get to school. You guys have to toughen up.
In mental health research, the whole thing like toxic stress, that seems to be the new one that's going on around right now. And what stress does, to children and to adults, in high doses. And the chemical reactions that take place within the body. So that's only new science that's emerged within the last 8 years or so. Again, under a decade, on being able to identify toxic stress. And what it does
which
to the
makes me
body.
think of the caging babies. There's been some talk of permanent damage as a result of extreme stress.
Yeah. So you have a story like that out of the States, and but the trickle down effect is huge around the world, right? So all of a sudden you can see, well, this is why the world is the way it is, because ever since there have been humans, we've been killing each other, eating each other, whatever we've been doing to each other, and now we flash forward to 2018, and we're trying to scratch our heads collectively going, well, how did we get here? And well, it's
one of the
thousands of years of fighting and stress.
One of the interesting things I've noticed when looking at the pictures of newly reunited kids with their separated from parents, I identify the look on the kids' faces. And they're not overjoyed because they're not convinced it won't happen again.
Okay.
Security, once broken, is
broken.
There you go.
Yep.
Look at the next time you see a kid being reunited with the parents, notice the parent is engaged in the moment. The kid can't process it, has no idea. The most sacred things it's ever known are apparently have no value or meaning or constant. I can't think of the word, how to word it, but.
Well, and this is the whole thing. This is one of the studies that I've been reading. They say that with especially with young children, because children are so they're really versatile, little beings, and with the right amount of nurturing, the right amount of love, that the children are really remarkable. The elasticity, the neural elasticity, is a lot better than say somebody our age, and they can bounce back. But there has to be like a lot of nurturing, and because I guess the control group, when they were doing all this research, kids that weren't nurtured or adults that weren't nurtured continued to have behavioral problems, as they progressed forward and as they aged. So a lot of nurturing, a lot of parental love, and everything like that. Hopefully, will help. So,
I think you suggested that we were overreacting to the Danforth shooting by focusing on guns.
No. I'm not saying that we're overreacting. I think I think at the beginning of this, well, not at the beginning, but I think around day 2, day 3, it was like, oh, where do you get the gun? Where do you get the gun? Da 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 da. After his parents, I think, had released a statement within the first 7 hours, apologizing for their son's behavior and actions, with the caveat, our son has been seriously mentally ill for his entire life and has been unable to get the proper supports that he needed.
Okay. I guess I was trying to steer you into the gun debate, which...
Again, the Just Desserts shooting back in the early 90s was the one that really got me, and I'm just so over this debate about guns. I'm really over it. I mean, this is an ongoing thing, and this has now been 25 years since Just Desserts. Okay?
Yeah, well, my understanding of that story was that it was an American gun brought into the country by a non-Canadian.
And we're going to have problems like that forever.
Right. Well,
because we are attached to the United States, right? So good fucking luck with that.
as a result of what you've said earlier, I'm a little bit curious about whether it's the people or the guns in your take on it. But did you hear about this? That, and I am assuming that it was triggered by the Danforth shooting, that now there's talk of banning handguns in Toronto.
Yeah, I think it was like within 48 to 72 hours that discussion came around. Yeah, well.
Okay.
Again,
but
this is so.
But
nothing's ever going to get done.
It looked like
it's always going to be the same problem. We'll be talking about this in 25 years.
Well, here's the deal. So it looked like their strategy. So it looked like their strategy was to reduce how they're sold. I don't know. I didn't hear much about how the ban would be implemented.
I could walk out here and go and buy a gun right now. Okay, so really, dude, it's a moot point. It's a moot point.
The argument amongst the pro-gun side is that I think there are statistics that show the number of registered guns that are used in these murders, and they're next to zero.
Yeah,
and then the percentage of murders that are committed from guns that are stolen from registered holders is next to zero. But that means that 99% of all these fatalities are from legally imported. And then there was a news story this week that a high percentage of these gun crimes are actually from Canadian-made guns. So it's not even about importing, or the question is. So my quick solution for it was that if you're going to have a handgun ban, specifically handgun, I don't know why we're not worried about these long guns, but whatever. I think there should be mandatory minimums. If you're holding a handgun within the GTA, it's mandatory minimums.
It's not a bad idea.
It's a quick, easy
Get in touch
fix.
with Doug Ford.
He wouldn't go for it. I'm sure he wouldn't. But
look, I mean, I'm all for responsible gun ownership. I have no. I mean, that thing kind of dodged us back in 2004 during the election. Farmers and hunters, indigenous people that require it. People living in Churchill, Manitoba, for instance, and the polar bears. So, I mean, it's not like you're going to reason with a polar bear as it's trying to attack your children. So, I am all for responsible gun ownership, long guns, whatever. The assault rifles and all that crap, I don't see any need for that bullshit. Keep it with the cops and the military, and then that's it. But I mean, handguns in cities. I don't know. Is there going to be a zombie apocalypse happening soon?
Well, I think the bigger
headshots.
The bigger argument would be that if handguns aren't appropriate in the city, then why would a handgun be appropriate outside of the city? Like, what good use could you have for one outside of the city? The thinking about having a different approach to long guns was that they're harder to conceal.
Well, exactly,
So I got lots of angle.
Is that a long gun in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?
Right, but then of course, right, we had that shooting in Las Vegas where 600 people are injured.
That was an AR-40 something or whatever.
It ain't
that was
no
a military assault. Yes, a military assault.
There are examples where concealment isn't an issue.
Yeah, well,
All right.
we're not the United States. We don't, thank God, have these crazy-ass school shootings every week and all this stuff.
Well, not every week, but... So listen, I had an American on, and he was going on about how Canadians seem to be smarter, and we had the healthcare, we're nicer and more polite and all this, and we don't have these mass killings, and yet we have.
You should listen to Ian from Ottawa on my podcast. He'll rip you a new one. You can forget about being polite. Anyways.
But we do have, and I wonder, here's a little a math project for you. If you adjust by population and scale down our numbers of incidents and numbers of victims per incident, we're still on the map. We can't deny that we don't have the same kinds of issues. And I mean, maybe not in a junior school, but what about the massacre at the engineering students?
École Polytechnique, yes. I was told back in 04-05 by Justice, when I was looking into some statistics, that on a per capita basis, Canada, I think, if I recall correctly, was more violent than the United States if you take into account assaults with knives. So we actually exceed the United States in serious assaults. So if you just swap out guns for knives. So
yeah, I think just this week there's been a few stabbings. So we've almost covered Toronto and Ontario-ish. What have you been following the Trump saga this week?
The thing with the European Union and the what was it he was saying? Trump was saying almost eliminating every single tariff. When the European Union head Jean-Claude Juncker came to Washington on, I guess it was Tuesday, and they surprised everybody by saying, well, we're going to eliminate pretty much most tariffs and barriers and do something about those subsidies on industrial goods.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what about steel and aluminum? Was that one of the...
Steel and aluminum, yeah, I think there is talk about that as well. So, maybe this is the madness of the genius, the evil genius that is Trump likes to believe that he is. So, I mean, maybe this is part of his negotiating tactic. But, I was thinking about this last night in light of the show for today. So, Trump might think that he's being an evil genius, but there's a lot of people that just, people are going to still want to do business with the States, right? But, the economy is doing really well down there. Corporate taxes have been cut. They've cut them from 35 to 21% now, and it's stimulating the economy. But with the trade wars that are happening right now, I think, and I could be wrong, I'm not an economist, I'm more political, social political stuff, but I think this might come back to haunt him, because above the fold in the New York Times, it's saying here that this is going to add $1 trillion of additional debt over the next decade, on average almost $100 billion more a year in deficits because of the tax cuts. So while the economy is growing right now, everything's going to catch up at some point.
So this week, Trump was bragging about possibly 4% growth based on the second quarter statistics. But those statistics are created not in the quarter where he started trade wars with most of the planet.
No, it's not. That's what I was saying. It hasn't caught up yet.
So, and then I find this interesting just in terms of interpreting Trump think. He says, because if he is a 100% of the time habitual liar, then everything he says has to be a lie. Has to be. So he says, just in one of his speeches he pointed out, he says, these numbers are sustainable.
That's the lie right there.
Yeah.
Because every economist that I've heard on the radio, whether it be conservative or liberal, are all saying I'm just parroting what they basically said, that this is only sustainable for a certain amount of time, and then above the fold, it's
but if he
$1 trillion over the next decade.
If he thinks to mention in his speech the sentence after bragging about the 4% growth and how it could remain for some time, and that there's no reason why we can't have several years of 4% growth. I don't even know we've ever had 4% growth while I was alive. But for him to just, in the middle of a speech, say these numbers are sustainable, right there.
Well, he's not saying, add to what you're saying, the soybean bailout that he just did for, $12 billion. Yeah. Well, this is a direct result of the tariffs that have been put on.
Right, and all those farmers are anti-socialism.
Yeah, and then there's a farmer from, Montana, Wisconsin, somewhere down there. And he was saying, no, we don't want government bailouts. We want the market. So, and then isn't this Mr. Billionaire, the capitalist dream, blah,
but
blah, blah.
I'm saying if he thinks to point out and add the sentence, these numbers are sustainable. If he lies 100% of the time, then he's telling us they're not sustainable. So I just found that helpful. Because, if there's this new way, so everything he says is a lie, then you can take it literally.
Yeah, well, and this is what we were discussing last week. All this is going to catch back up to him eventually, right? So, and why is it going to catch up to him? Well, because you have people who, the real experts that are out there, their voices will hopefully rise to the top and drown out all the fake news and everything, and they'll be heard.
The major developments in the Russian saga. Cohen wants to tell Mueller that Trump knew beforehand about Don's meeting with the Russians in Trump Tower. Now, this, if true, means that every single time he said no collusion, he truly was lying to the public, and apparently that's not illegal. Which is interesting. It's not illegal to lie. And
he's just a fuzzy truth.
Well, it's interesting because it's my understanding, though, in other areas, if you misrepresent yourself for gain, it's fraud. And I just wonder if you're going to be splitting hairs and sending stuff to the Supreme Court when Donald Trump lies to the entire nation publicly. It is to benefit. There is a material benefit. He either continues to collect his paycheck as president or wins another election or wins donations from people who are basing their donations on his false misrepresentation. This is wire fraud, is it not?
Didn't I have this little theater of the mind playing right now as you were saying that, and it was Richard Nixon on the television saying at his White House, sitting at the desk there, the American people have a right to know that their president is not a crook.
Okay, so there's more.
That's just going on my head on auto repeat right now.
I submit that if you lie in publicly, and your misrepresentation causes a gain, either prolonged support, further support, re-election, whatever that gain is through misrepresentation, then that is fraud. But apparently the Supreme Court thinks that corporations are people, so we'll leave that. Okay.
The American people have a right to know that their president is not a crook.
So, okay, so Cohen wants to tell Mueller that Trump knew before Don's meeting. So he knew beforehand. Most of the parties who were there are like campaign top heads. It's his own son. It's in his building. It's for his campaign. All right. So, and then furthermore, Cohen, turning state's evidence, possibly. Who would know more than Cohen? The money man who executes, I think, Trump's
I think
tax.
he's going to have an accident. He's going to have an accident.
He does his taxes. He runs that foundation. He knows.
Yeah, he's going to have an accident. An untimely health care crisis.
Well, maybe he'll get one of those nerve agents from the Russians. Okay, so there's that.
Or not one of those nerve agents from the Russians. The sonic attack.
No, okay.
That's,
All right, Avenatti, 3 more women. 3 more women.
Is this a song or is this a movie script, a screenplay?
3 more women.
3 more women.
One of whom was also paid through the same company that runs the National Enquirer. So in addition to McDougal, forget Stormy, forget McDougal, who was paid through, they used favors through the National Enquirer to pay the porn star.
Is this why Melania Trump had CNN on Air Force One a couple of days ago, and Trump apparently freaked out?
Let's make
Is
sure
she trying to get back at her husband because of all these affairs?
Let's make sure we get to that. So Avenatti has 3 more women, one of whom was also paid through the Inquirer.
Yeah.
3 fresh ones. So that'll bring the total to 5 that's in the sphere of attention right now.
Mm-hmm.
All those court documents will be... So now we don't have 2 examples of thwarting campaign.
So why is this shocking right now? I mean, we already knew with Stormy Daniels and everybody else.
Yeah, but
that
when you've got 2 or 3 or 5,
right,
and then if you were to argue that paying them through the Inquirer was just somebody doing a favor, and now you've got another woman who's been paid through the Inquirer, then it's a specified channel. It's not just a one-off error. It is a consistent policy to thwart attention, which is to hide.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That's fucking... Okay. So, okay, hang on. Okay. And this week, when... I don't know if you saw the press conference. I think it was Thursday. Could have been Wednesday.
Okay.
And one of the pool reporters got up and asked, "Can you trust Michael Cohen?
Yeah.
What's
she
on
got
those tapes?" Yeah, they barred her.
Yeah. Where did I just read that? I just read that in the Star.
So, foreknowledge of the meeting with Trump in Trump Tower by Don Jr. Makes Trump the kingpin in the collusion, because with knowledge and decision making and authority, and the top guy goes down with the ship and takes responsibility for his subordinates. Foreknowledge of the meeting that Trump set up in Trump Tower, Don Jr. Foreknowledge of that meeting by the president, then president-to-be, makes him the kingpin in the collusion. And every denial, going after reporters when they ask those specific questions, lying to those reporters and all of the public, makes him the kingpin in the cover-up. Circumstantial evidence, when you align it up on a chronology of the meeting, when Trump might have been informed of it, how the meeting goes, and the aftermath of it, when you apply it to a chronology, a couple days before the meeting with Don Jr. that Trump apparently didn't know about, he announces that they'll be coming out with new dirt on Hillary, just you wait and see. Then the meeting occurs, which provided them nothing. He was promising there would be a speech on the new dirt on Hillary. Then after that, there is no speech. He cancels the speech. So I don't know. I don't know what's to take.
It's a classic wag the dog. They're saying here in the Times, the recording was among 12 handed over to prosecutors from a trove of Mr. Cohen's material that the FBI agents seized in April. It is only one recording of substance between Mr. Cohen and Mr. Trump, according to people familiar with the material. Others include Mr. Cohen speaking to figures in broadcast news, these people have said.
But I think during the week, there was another 100 recordings came surfacing. We don't know what percentage of those may have had Trump speaking to Cohen directly.
Well, it says, again, federal prosecutors an agreement that could unearth many of the secrets that helped bury a decade of work as Mr. Trump's fixer. So he apparently was doing this for a decade. So
Cohen says that he was in the room where Trump was informed by Don Jr. and several others of this meeting. So it's going to be his word against someone else's. But saying that in court opens up cross-examination of the other members in the room, which is a whole kettle of fish right there, which reads a whole ream of new sets of evidence and people who may chime in on this, so it expands it further. But it was funny that Giuliani, I think on Friday on Fox or something, was arguing that if it had happened due to Cohen's propensity for recording conversations, it would be on tape. Mm-hmm. And so because it isn't on tape, it didn't happen. And I just thought, wow, that's such a... I don't know who's going to buy that. There's no judge who's going to buy that argument. On a split screen, I think on Friday, they had Michael Avenatti battling it out with Alan Dershowitz.
Okay.
That was an interesting thing to witness. It's really hard to tell who won that exchange because in the end, Dershowitz was accusing Avenatti and suggesting that Avenatti may have to appear before the ethics board of the bar to explain his meeting with Cohen's lawyers, because they bumped into, I think, Cohen's lawyers at some restaurant and they had some discussions, which actually part of those discussions is why Avenatti suggested there may be more than one recording of Trump. Mm-hmm. And so Dershowitz is asking, how did you know about recordings? And he I guess, and I think that Michael Avenatti's defense was that he had mentioned these recordings previous to the meeting of these. But in either case, Dershowitz was sticking to his guns that Avenatti's violated some ethics rule of, because I think you need the permission of the client in order to speak to the lawyers of the client, which is something I hadn't really heard of, but it's from Dershowitz, so it, in all likelihood is probably true. But that presupposes, do you really think that Dershowitz is aware of all the agreements and conversations that Cohen has had with Avenatti? And Avenatti in the exchange actually points out that he was given permission to talk to them by, guess who, Michael Cohen. So, but it was really an interesting thing because I think it would be wonderful if somebody like Michael Avenatti would run for president. I'm just laughing as I'm saying this, but that's what I wanted to see. So I'm so apologetic for this, but Michael Avenatti battling it out with Alan Dershowitz. It was beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting when AI takes over, and
we don't need lawyers.
Yeah, it'll be like a chess match between AI. I think what's also interesting, and I think it goes further to prove what you were stating earlier about amassing all the evidence with all these different stories with Trump and the lawsuit accusing President Trump of violating the Constitution by maintaining a financial interest in his company's Washington hotel, and how on Wednesday it cleared a crucial hurdle when the federal judge allowed the case to move forward, and it's now at the evidence gathering stage. So.
Well, here's something else. That Trump building he built across the street from the White House,
just a couple of blocks from the White House,
the post office rebuild or something like that. I think that in some other agreements, one of the articles of condition is you can't be an office holder.
Well, that's it. Exactly. Remember that, yeah. Well, apparently it's earned just in 2017. It reaped the revenue. It's saying here it was $40 million, and the courts are now saying that ordered that a wide range of documents relevant to the case be preserved, including any records that would reveal the identities of Trump hotel and restaurant guests, the amounts they paid for, and also for the amounts they paid for rooms and event space, and profits for the Trump organization, as well as the hotel's marketing campaigns aimed at foreign diplomats.
So that's interesting. In the past, all of those... Listen to this. It's always a rich person, a corporation, who's sending tinfoil bricks of money and putting in new bathrooms for the politician, right? This is the opposite. This is the politician giving you half price on your jacuzzi and free drinks at the bar. It's the opposite. That's weird. Yeah. Who would even make that up? You know?
Trump.
Who could even think of that?
I'm telling you, this guy is like a. Okay. He wanted to shake things up and rewrite the rule book. Well, he's certainly done it, and people are starting to take notice and trying to copy. You know, we have our own little Doug Ford here in Ontario. You know, so it's just going to get more interesting.
You know, I have to make one of those big RICO charts on my wall that shows that pyramid diagram.
Yeah.
And I try to keep the names straight. It's just so, all the Cohen stuff. Now there's 3 more women. There's trials starting next week. There's trials starting the week after. It's unbelievable. So it's the golden rule. The one with the gold makes all the rules.
That's it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, look what happened within the last 72 hours with down in your city, man. Like, you just had, right in the middle of an election, you've just had everything overturned. You know, and God knows if there's going to be a ripple effect across Ontario now.
Hang on, what are you talking about? They were not in the middle of an election.
The whole thing about going from 47 seats to 25 seats.
Okay, so when are those elections? It's in
October.
Oh.
November, sorry. November. Yeah.
Okay, well, here's the counter-argument. L.A. has 15 city councilors.
15 city councilors. It's 260,000. They represent 260,000 constituents. 96 neighborhood councils. Residents per neighborhood, approximately 40,625. Next. Toronto.
Did you just contradict me? It's 15 or 16?
15 city councilors, and per councilor, residents per councilor is 260,000.
Okay.
There's also 96 neighborhood councils.
Oh, I know. What is that?
And per neighborhood council, there are 40,000. They represent 40,625.
Okay, now that's the lie.
Yeah.
That's the lie. That is incredible. So they have 112 councilors, essentially.
112 councilors, yeah.
So there's the lie again.
Yep. That's why I said Doug Ford. That's why I brought that in as a comparison. And that's why I was saying earlier on in the conversation. It's just a big old circle, and people are trying to.
So unless you fact checked, like, who's going to fact check? Like, I swear to God, that's the. Well, you know yourself. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. Well, we went to L.A. We made the comparison. We talked to people there. They have. For a city of a comparable size, they have 16 city councilors.
That's why Donald Trump said, "I love stupid people."
Come on.
Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
Donald Trump and Michael Cohen talking about paying off the Inquirer to silence the McDougal story.
Funding, yes. And it's all the stuff, because, you never know where that company, you never know where he's going to be. Correct. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be...
What financing?
We'll have to pay you. So no. I got no.
I'm Dave Archer in Toronto.
And I'm Ian Stolberg in Ottawa.